chairman of the House Oversight Committee, Congressman Darrell Issa, sent a letter yesterday to the White House questioning why President Obama is claiming executive privilege over certain fast and furious documents. Now, in it, the chairman explains very clearly that by invoking this privilege, the president is admitting to one of two things. Now, either somebody inside the White House was, quote, involved in managing Operation Fast and Furious and the fallout from it, or option two, this power is being abused with the goal of, quote, further obstructing a congressional investigation. An administration spokesman was quick to call the letter, quote, absurd. And late-breaking news tonight, we are learning that last-minute efforts by the White House to prevent the vote failed. Reports say that the administration tried to present 30 pages of a document on a last-ditch effort to hold off this vote. But here to elaborate on the very serious accusations and this late-breaking news is the man himself, House Government Oversight Committee Chair Darrell Issa. Congressman, welcome back, sir.
Thanks for having me back, Sean, and thanks for covering the important issue of Fast and Furious and the death of Brian Terry.
Well, this is a thing that's amazing to me, and we had the parents of Brian Terry on this program the other night, and they want answers, and they feel that the White House is obstructing the investigation. How long have you been looking into this, just to remind people?
Well, it's about 18 months. And in that 18 months, there was 10 months in which we were flat out lied to. Senator Grassley was lied to in a letter, and we were also given live testimony that was false. And it took about 10 months before they finally owned up to it being exactly the opposite of what they said. They said they never let guns walk, when in fact Fast and Furious was about deliberately and knowingly letting 2,000 very powerful weapons cross the border with the knowledge of ATF and high-ranking individuals in the Justice Department.
Congressman, when you say flat out lied to, wasn't Roger Clemens, didn't he just spend the last 5 years of his life? He was acquitted, but wasn't the issue of whether he lied to Congress? Isn't that called perjury?
Exactly. My committee referred Roger Clemens, a bipartisan referral, because they believed that he had given false testimony about his use of steroids in baseball. Well, in fact, it took dozens or hundreds of lawyers inside the Justice Department who knew that at various times that guns had walked, not coming forward and telling the truth, in order to have 10 months of Senator Grassley and the American people all relying on a letter that simply was false.
All right, so then if that happened to Roger Clemens, we don't have a two-tier justice system, do we, Congressman? With the same recommendation, then go for the people in the White House that lied to you in terms of it being sent forth for investigation by prosecutors?
Well, very clearly, the Justice Department was willing to prosecute not once but twice Roger Clemens. Well, in fact, they're unwilling to hold themselves to a standard of accountability. Ultimately, the contempt vote scheduled for Thursday is very narrow. It's simply about the period of the cover-up, the 10 months in which we were given false testimony, but it also is part of getting to the truth. If we can figure out the people who lied to get that false letter to us and then lied to keep it covered up, we may very well find that those are the same people who ultimately are responsible for Fast and Furious that need to be held accountable.
But didn't the Attorney General himself lie to you, Congressman? I mean, he gave you false information. He said he didn't know about it until a few weeks before he testified in May of 2011. In fact, you found out that he knew about it many, many months earlier.
We did find out he knew about it earlier than his original testimony would imply.
Is that a lie?
He's corrected the record and said that he was mistaken. We try not to catch people in lies when it's in fact a mistake, but what we really want to do is we want to be able to verify testimony given. For example, the former ATF director gave us 2 days of sworn testimony in which he talked about some documents, some emails that he sent to various people. Those are among the documents that we've asked for that we can't find any form of executive privilege on, and yet they've not only not been offered to us, but even today when representatives of my office and the Speaker's office went to the White House to try to make a last-ditch deal, those were not records they were willing to offer to us.
Congressman, it seems to me, and maybe I'm reading into this, that, you know, the president's precipitating here a constitutional crisis in many ways. By invoking executive privilege. He's going to have to explain on every one of these documents why he wants to invoke executive privilege. Now, that'll probably get him past the election. It seems to me that there had to be some political calculation here. Either what is in those documents is so embarrassing, so damaging, that they didn't want to release it, and that they would rather go through this crisis even though 2-1, there's a poll out today, the American people said that the president was not right to assert executive privilege here.
Well, ultimately, this bears a striking resemblance to something that happened when I was a very young man and you were probably a young boy, and that was when Nixon pushed the emerging discussion and discovery of the plumbers' activity at Watergate, pushed it past the election. Ultimately, he won that election overwhelmingly, and then the facts eventually came out. In this case, I don't believe the fallout is directly the president, but he is pushing on behalf of key people who worked for him this issue probably past the election, hoping that his popularity will prevent us from getting to the truth. That's not something that I think is in the best interest of the Constitution, and ultimately the Speaker has been very clear, very accommodating, but very clear that we have to get to the truth.
Let me ask you this, because the president denied any knowledge of this and said he did not approve Operation Fast and Furious. He said his attorney general did not approve Operation Fast and Furious. If it turns out, in fact, they did, what does that mean?
Well, if they've lied to the Congress, they'll be held accountable both through our process and by the voters. I think the important thing is that the American people don't want to have an executive privilege that's so broad that Congress can't get into things like Solyndra or Fast and Furious or the GSA scandal simply because everything seems to include a deliberative process. So to a certain extent, when Speaker Boehner, the Speaker of the House, says we have to make sure we get to a balance that's constitutionally fair, he's fighting for sort of the freedom and transparency that groups on the left and the right are always encouraging me to make sure we do protect, that balance between the various parts of our government, because if our branch doesn't assert itself, ultimately we're no longer the republic our founders wanted us to be.
It seems that the president in a lot of ways is not respecting checks and balances and the idea that we have co-equal branches of government. Congressman, we'll continue to follow this, and I hope the Terry family gets the answers they deserve, and appreciate you being with us.
Okay, we will make sure the Terry family gets their answers.